The word did not tremble. It did not soften itself with apology, nor bow beneath expectation. It fell clean, sharp, and final into the glittering silence of the ballroom. Lady Grace Johnson stood beneath 1,000 chandeliers, her chin lifted, her gaze steady upon the most feared man in England. Before her stood Duke Cody Mackenzie, the ruthless duke every noblewoman had pursued, whispered about, and quietly feared. And she had refused him. Fans stilled mid-air. Whispers died before they were born. A countess near the musicians dropped her glass. No one, no duchess, no heiress, no woman with fortune or title had ever denied him. Yet this woman, this apothecary's daughter with no lineage to shield her, had done so without hesitation. Cody Mackenzie did not move. For one suspended breath, the entire court waited for ruin, for humiliation, for retaliation so cold it would echo through London for years. Instead, he smiled, slowly, deliberately. A smile that did not belong in polite society, a smile that promised something far more dangerous than anger. And in that moment, though she did not yet understand it, Grace Johnson had changed the course of her life. By morning, London belonged to her defiance, not to Parliament's debates, not to military contracts, not to Lady Winslow's unfortunate fall into the ornamenty fountain. No, the city spoke of one thing, the woman who had said no to a duke. The story spread from marble halls to market stalls, growing sharper with each telling. A commoner, they said. An apothecary woman, a nobody though never loud enough for her to hear it directly. She had stood in the grandest ballroom of the season and refused him as if he had offered her inconvenience rather than power. Grace heard the scandal not from gossip, but from truth. Miss Corvine Aldwell arrived at the shop before sunrise, ink still smudged upon her fingers, her eyes alight with barely contained disbelief. She placed 3 newspapers upon the workbench without a word. Grace did not look at them. She continued sorting dried lavender beneath the soft gold light of the east-facing window. "They spelled my name correctly," she said calmly. "That is progress." Corvine stared at her. "They are calling it the most shocking social defiance of the decade. The decade has only just begun." Silence stretched between them. The apothecary breathed quietly around them, cedar, chamomile, and the gentle creak of shelves that had witnessed years of careful work. Grace's sleeves were already rolled, her hair pinned with efficient precision. She looked like a woman already ahead of the day. "I know what I did," she said at last, "and I would do it again." Corvine exhaled slowly. "He will retaliate. Yes, he has ruined women for less. I am aware." A pause. "And you are not afraid?" Grace turned the lavender stem in her fingers, inspecting it. "I did not say that." What she did not say was that something had unsettled her. Not his title, not his reputation, not even the undeniable force of his presence. It was his smile, that quiet, unreadable curve of his lips, as though her refusal had not closed a door but opened one, and she did not yet know what waited on the other side. He came 3 days later, not with a carriage, not with guards, not with the formal announcement of a duke intending to ruin a life. He came alone, on foot, dressed in a dark coat so finely made it concealed its expense, and he walked into her apothecary as though he belonged there. Grace did not look up immediately. "You are 20 minutes late," she said evenly, measuring a tincture. "Or half a day early. Choose as you please." "I choose on time," he replied. His voice was low, controlled, unmistakable. She finished her work before granting him her full attention. Up close in honest morning light, he was no less formidable. But something had shifted. Without the ballroom, without the audience, he seemed less guarded, not weaker, simply more real. "You built this," he said, glancing over her shelves. "Yes, every label, every supplier, every fragile piece of independence she had fought to claim." He nodded once. "I am not here to threaten you. I did not assume you were." A flicker of something approval perhaps passed through his expression. "I want to understand," he said, "why you refused me." She met his gaze directly. "Because I meant to." That is not an answer. It is the only one you are owed. A silence followed. but not an empty one. It stretched steady, deliberate, until it became a test of will. "What would it take," he said at last, "for you to see me, not my title, not my name, but me?" Grace studied him, not with hesitation, but with precision. Then 4 weeks. He did not interrupt. "You have 4 weeks," she continued, "to make me fall for you. Not with power, not with wealth, not with anything that belongs to your station." Her voice remained calm. "If you succeed, I will grant you one honest conversation about what comes next. And if I fail, you leave," she said. "You leave my name, my business, and my life untouched. Forever." The shop fell still. Even the light seemed to pause. Cody Mackenzie watched her. Long enough that most women would have softened, explained, retreated. Grace did none of those things. "Finally, 4 weeks," he said quietly, "starting now." He turned and walked out. No flourish, no argument, no promise, just a decision. Grace stood at the window for exactly 4 seconds after he disappeared into the street. Then she returned to her work. But something within her, something carefully built and fiercely guarded, had already begun to shift. And she did not yet know whether that shift would be her salvation or her undoing. He did not court her as London expected. There were no jeweled gifts, no orchestra beneath her window, no ostentatious flowers sent with cards meant to be seen by others. Instead, Duke Cody Mackenzie began appearing where her real life existed. At the canal market before dawn, at the grain merchant's stall on narrow, muddy mornings, at the herb seller's lane where serious buyers spoke plainly and had no patience for rank. Morton, her oldest supplier, mentioned with visible suspicion that a tall gentleman in a dark coat had spent nearly an hour asking sensible questions about dried coriander, shipping losses, and winter spoilage. Did he seem to understand the answers? Grace asked. Morton tied a parcel with rough fingers, too well for comfort. After that, she noticed the traces herself. A supplier mentioning that the Duke had asked how wild rosemary should be stored, an elderly root seller who disliked nearly everyone informing Grace that his Grace had stood in the cold learning how to tell spoiled valerian by smell, and had not once behaved like a fool. He was not performing charm. He was learning her world. That disturbed her far more than flattery would have done. One Thursday afternoon, he entered the apothecary while Corvine was sorting stock. Grace was in the back room compounding an order. When she returned, she found the Duke of Blackthorn seated at her work table, stripping dried chamomile from its stems with severe concentration and very little skill. A ridiculous sight, and yet, somehow, not laughable. Corvine, entirely unhelpful, said. He asked if he might be useful. Cody glanced up. "I have been informed this is exacting work." "It is," Grace said, setting down her ledger, "and you are doing it badly." I had gathered as much. She moved beside him, took one stem from his hand, and showed him the quicker motion. His dark gaze followed the movement with complete attention. "Why chamomile?" he asked. "It calms the nerves," she said, "helps people sleep, eases pain." Most dismiss it because it is not dramatic. His expression changed only slightly. "As with some people," he said. Grace did not answer, but for the first time the silence between them felt less like opposition and more like the opening move of something neither of them had intended. The first gift arrived without a name. No crest, no footman, no announcement. It was left upon the apothecary's delivery ledge in the quiet hour before noon, wrapped in plain brown paper like any ordinary parcel. Grace did not open it at once. She finished her work first, measured a tincture, sealed 2 orders, recorded 3 accounts. Only then did she untie the string. Inside lay a single folded card. Nothing ornate, nothing showy, just careful, deliberate handwriting. "You once said the scent of dried rosemary reminded you of your mother's kitchen." Grace stilled. "You said she hummed while she worked, and that you never knew the name of the song." Her fingers tightened slightly around the card. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope. She opened it slowly. Inside a sheet of parchment. A melody. Not merely notes, but a name. A title, written in an archivist's precise hand. Alongside it, a brief explanation from the Eastern Library, a northern folk tune commonly sung in market towns during the years her mother would have been young. Grace did not move. The apothecary continued around her. Shelves creaked. The street murmured. A customer's voice drifted faintly from outside, but she heard none of it, because 4 years ago only once she had mentioned that memory in a small printed interview few had ever read. And he had found it. He had remembered, and then he had gone searching for something she herself had long ago stopped hoping to know. Corvin appeared in the doorway, took one look at her face, and wisely said nothing. Grace set the paper down with great care, but something within her did not settle so easily. The second gesture was stranger, and somehow more unsettling. A boy from the market arrived breathless with news. "The Duke, miss," he said, barely containing his excitement. "He's taken the gray brute from the East End shelter." Grace looked up sharply. "The large one?" she asked. "The impossible one," the boy confirmed with delight. "The one what bites boots and breaks cages." The dog had been unmanageable. Returned by 3 households, refused by all others, a creature with opinions too strong for polite society. Grace had mentioned it once, quietly, in passing, that she understood such a creature, but some beings were not meant to be softened into compliance. And now, the Duke of Blackthorn had taken it into his home, not for spectacle, not for praise, but because she had understood it. Grace turned toward the window. The lower city moved as it always did, carts, voices, the smell of bread drifting through narrow streets. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. Somewhere beyond those streets, a man of immense power was attempting to coexist with a creature that defied control. Simply because she had once said she recognized something of herself in it, Grace pressed her fingers briefly to her temple, not in distress, but in something far more dangerous: recognition. 10 days into the 4 weeks, she saw him without warning. At the canal market, before sunrise. The air was cool, the river mist clinging low over the stalls. He stood at the far end, speaking with old Mistress Seraphil, the most unforgiving seller in the district. The woman tolerated no nonsense, no arrogance, no wasted breath. And yet, she was showing him something, a root, twisted and pale, demonstrating how to judge its quality by scent. Cody bent his head slightly, listening, not as a duke, not as a man accustomed to obedience, but as a student. Grace watched from a distance, unseen, unacknowledged, and for a fleeting, unguarded moment, something shifted within her. Not surrender. Not yet. But the beginning of something far more fragile. Something she had not permitted herself in years: curiosity. That same afternoon he returned to the apothecary, not to speak, not to persuade, only to continue the chamomile he had not yet mastered. Grace stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. His large hands, so ill-suited to delicate work, moved carefully, almost stubbornly. He did not rush. He did not abandon the task. He simply persisted. He glanced up. "I am improving," he said. "Marginally," she replied. A pause. "Then why?" she asked. He did not pretend to misunderstand. "Because you told me not to use what belongs to my title. That is not what I meant." "I know," he said quietly. Their eyes met. For the first time, there was no challenge in the silence, no negotiation, only something quieter, more honest. "I am not trying to win," he added. Grace did not answer, but something inside her, something long held, rigid, softened, just slightly, and for the first time since that night beneath the chandeliers, she wondered, not what he could offer her, but who he truly was. When no one else was watching, the trouble did not arrive with scandal. It arrived with whispers, soft, measured, the kind that moved through drawing rooms and council chambers before slipping quietly into places like hers, where consequences were felt long before they were announced. Grace heard of it on a gray Wednesday afternoon. Mr. Oswald Frey, a linen merchant who supplied both noble households and practical trades, came for his usual order. He spoke as he always did, carefully and directly, as though placing each word where it could do the least harm. "There has been discussion," he said, adjusting his cuffs, "in certain upper circles." Grace continued wrapping his parcel. "Regarding what?" "Your contracts," he replied. "Your refusal of His Grace. What it suggests about your disposition." Her hands did not falter. "And what does it suggest?" "That you may not be suitable," he said, choosing the word like a man selecting a blade, "to maintain agreements tied to noble patronage." There it was. not a punishment, a correction, a reminder of her place. Grace tied the string neatly and handed him the parcel. And how did this discussion conclude? Mr. Frey hesitated. Then, with quiet satisfaction, it did not conclude as expected. She stilled. Someone spoke, he continued, at length, with considerable authority. Grace's gaze lifted slowly. He argued your work, Mr. Frey said, your integrity, your right to refuse any proposal regardless of rank without it being held against your livelihood. A pause. He was not contradicted. The shop seemed to grow quieter. And this someone? Grace asked. Mr. Frey inclined his head slightly. I believe you can make an educated guess. She stood at the window long after he left. The street carried on unaware, indifferent. But Grace could see it clearly. A long table, men in polished coats, expectations already decided before the discussion began, and him, standing among them, not defending her to impress, not to win her favor, but because it was right, and he had not told her. He had not come to the shop with it, had not used it as proof, had not added it to the quiet list of things he had done. He had simply done it. Grace closed her eyes briefly. That unsettled her more than anything else, because power, when used without demand, was far more difficult to resist. The gallery exhibition was the last place she expected to feel it. The upper city was warm with candlelight and quiet refinement. Paintings lined the walls, botanical illustrations, detailed and precise. Grace moved through them with practiced ease, her slate blue gown understated but elegant, her presence neither announced nor overlooked. She saw him before she intended to. Standing alone, not surrounded, not performing, simply observing a large woodland illustration as though the rest of the room did not exist. He looked up. Their eyes met. And something unspoken passed between them. Grace crossed the room. She did not hesitate. You recognize the species, he said as she came to stand beside him. Most of them, she replied. A pause. Soft. Unforced. The 4 weeks are nearly finished, he said. 3 days, yes. The words settled between them. Heavy. Inevitable. You went to the council, she said. I did? You did not tell me. It was not for you to thank me for. She turned, then fully studying him with that same direct, unwavering gaze. You could have used it, she said, as leverage. I do not want leverage. What do you want? His answer came without hesitation. You. The word was quiet, but it did not waver. Not like hers had not wavered in the ballroom. Grace's breath caught just slightly. I do not want to win a condition, he continued. If you tell me in 3 days that nothing has changed, I will walk away. Completely. The room blurred slightly at the edges. Candlelight flickered. I am not here to claim you, he said. I am here because somewhere in these past weeks, I stopped trying to prove something and began trying to understand you. Silence. Not empty, but full. And you think I have not noticed? She asked softly. His gaze held hers. I think you notice everything. She turned back to the painting. Her voice, when it came, was steady. Come to the apothecary, she said. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. A pause. I will make breakfast. He arrived exactly on time. The shop below was closed. Quiet, but the side passage door stood unlocked. An invitation. He understood it. The kitchen above was warm with morning light. Terracotta floors, open windows, the scent of bread and herbs lingering in the air. Grace stood at the stove. Simple, unadorned. More herself than he had ever seen her. Sit, she said. He obeyed. She moved through the space with ease, showing him where things were without ceremony. The bread. The honey from the northern hills, the small details that did not matter, unless they meant everything. They ate in quiet conversation. Nothing grand, nothing rehearsed, just truth. Callum, the dog still unnamed. The paintings, with small ordinary things that revealed more than any declaration could. And when the morning settled into stillness, Grace wrapped her hands around her tea. Hands spoke. I did not fall because of your challenge. He did not interrupt. I fell, she said slowly, because you paid attention. A pause. The chamomile. The song. The child. The way you stood in those rooms and spoke when you did not have to. She looked at him then. Clear. Certain. I chose this, she said, on my own terms. His voice was quiet. I know, and it must remain that way. It will. Silence returned, but it had changed. It no longer guarded. It held. Grace reached across the table and slid the honey jar toward him, a small gesture, almost nothing. And yet, for a woman who had built her life upon standing alone, it was everything. But even as the morning light warmed the room, and something fragile, dangerous and real began to take shape, neither of them yet understood what the cost of that choice would be. It began with an invitation she could not refuse, delivered not to her shop, but to her reputation. A cream envelope sealed with the crest of Lady Eleanor Winsford arrived 2 days after that quiet breakfast. Grace broke the seal without ceremony. You are requested at Winsford House this Thursday evening. No warmth, no explanation, only expectation. Corvine read it over her shoulder. This is not a social call. No, Grace said calmly. It is an inspection. Winsford House glittered with calculated elegance. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble. A room filled not with conversation but observation. Grace felt it the moment she stepped inside. Eyes, measured. Curious, some amused. Others sharpened with quiet disdain. A woman without title did not belong here. Unless she was being weighed, Lady Eleanor received her with a smile too precise to be kind. Miss Johnson, she said, how extraordinary to see you among us. I was invited, Grace replied evenly. A faint ripple of amusement passed through the room. Indeed, Lady Eleanor said, and such invitations are rarely extended without reason. Grace understood then. This was not an evening. It was a stage. And what role have you assigned me? Grace asked. Lady Eleanor's smile deepened. That depends, she said softly, on how well you understand your position. The questions began subtly. Her business, her clients, her refusal. Each inquiry dressed as curiosity, but sharpened into judgment. A remarkable rise, one lady murmured, for someone unconnected. And yet, another added lightly, one must wonder how long such independence can be maintained without proper alliances. Grace answered each question with measured calm, never defensive, never deferential. But she felt it, the pressure, the quiet insistence that she justify her existence in a room that had never intended to accept her. Then Lady Eleanor spoke again. You refused his grace, she said, her voice carrying just enough to silence nearby conversation. Yes, bold, she replied, or perhaps short-sighted. A pause. You must understand, Miss Johnson, that men of such rank do not often repeat their offers. Grace held her gaze. I did not ask him to. A sharper silence followed. Fans slowed, glances sharpened, and if he does not, Lady Eleanor pressed, what then becomes of you? Grace felt it then, not fear, not doubt, but something far more dangerous. The awareness that she cared about the answer, because for the first time in years, her future was not entirely her own. I will remain exactly what I am, Grace said, and that has always been enough. But even as she spoke, a quiet voice within her asked, will it still be? The doors opened, not loudly, not dramatically, but the shift in the room was immediate. Conversation faltered. Attention turned. Duke Cody Mackenzie had arrived, not announced, not escorted. He walked in as though he belonged, because he did. The room adjusted around him. It always did. His gaze found Grace almost instantly, not by chance, by intent. Lady Eleanor's smile flickered. Ah, she said softly. How convenient. Cody did not greet the room, did not acknowledge the subtle performance unfolding. He crossed directly to Grace, stopped before her, and in that moment, the entire room held its breath again. Miss Johnson, he said quietly, Your Grace. The formality between them felt wrong now. deliberate, protective. "You were not expected here," she added. "I was not invited," he replied. A pause. "I came anyway." Lady Eleanor stepped forward. "Your Grace," she said, "we were merely enjoying Miss Johnson's perspective." Cody's gaze shifted to her briefly. Cold, measured, then returned to Grace. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked. Grace met his eyes. There it was again. That dangerous steadiness. "I am managing," she said. Something in his expression changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. A tightening. A decision forming. Lady Eleanor laughed lightly. "How charming," she said, though one wonders how long such arrangements can remain amusing. The implication hung in the air. Temporary, fragile, unacceptable. Grace felt it, felt the room waiting to see which of them would yield. And for the first time, uncertainty touched her. Not about herself, but about him. Would he step back into his world and leave her standing alone in hers? Or would he, at last, do something that could not be undone? Cody looked at her. Not the room, not the expectations pressing in from every side, only her. And in his silence, something shifted again, something irreversible. Enough. The word did not rise, it settled. Cold, final, and the room abated. Every whisper stilled beneath the quiet authority of Duke Cody Mackenzie. Lady Eleanor's smile faltered only for a fraction, but Grace saw it. So did everyone else. Cody did not raise his voice. He did not posture. He simply stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Grace until the space left for doubt disappeared entirely. "This is not entertainment," he said. His gaze moved, slow and deliberate, across the assembled nobles. "This is not speculation." A pause. "And it is certainly not your concern." The weight of his words pressed through the room like a shifting tide. Lady Eleanor recovered quickly. "Your Grace," she said lightly, though her fingers tightened on her fan. "We are merely observing what is unusual." "Yes," he replied, "you are." His tone did not change. "That will end now." Silence followed. Heavy, uncomfortable. Because no one present had ever heard him speak like this. Not in defense, not for a woman who had refused him. Grace felt it then, not relief. Not yet, something sharper, more dangerous. Because this public line he was drawing could not be undone, and neither could its consequences. Lady Eleanor tilted her head. "You speak with remarkable certainty," she said, "for a situation that, by all accounts, remains unresolved." Her eyes flicked briefly toward Grace. "Does it?" The question lingered. Deliberate, provocative. The room waited. Grace felt every gaze, every expectation. And beneath it, her own pulse, steady but undeniable. This was the moment she had never intended to stand in. Not in a ballroom, not before society, not with her life balanced between independence and something far less certain. Cody turned to her then, fully, not as a duke addressing a subject, but as a man asking a question he could not answer alone. His voice lowered, quiet enough that only she heard it. "Tell me to walk away," he said, "and I will." The words struck deeper than anything spoken aloud. Because she knew. He meant them. There would be no retaliation, no quiet punishment, no damage left behind. He would leave, completely, and she would return to the life she had built, safe, certain, untouched. Grace looked at him, truly looked, at the man who had stood in council rooms for her, who had learned her world without demanding entry into it, who had listened to a child, to a root cellar, to her, who had never once tried to own her. The room faded. The chandeliers, the watching eyes, the weight of expectation, all of it blurred into something distant and irrelevant. There was only this choice, and the truth she had been carefully, quietly avoiding. Her voice, when it came, was steady, but not untouched. "I do not want you to walk away." The words were not loud, but they carried, because the room was listening, and because something in them could not be mistaken. Cody did not move at first, as though absorbing the meaning, ensuring it was real. Then, very slowly, he exhaled. Not relief, not triumph, something deeper, something earned. Lady Eleanor's fan stilled entirely. The room shifted again, but this time not with curiosity, with understanding. Something had changed, something irreversible, and yet it was not finished. Not yet, because Grace turned slightly, not toward him, but toward the room, toward the world that had always required her to prove herself. Her chin lifted, her voice calm. "I did not come here to be chosen," she said. A ripple moved through the gathered nobles. "I came here because I was invited." Her gaze moved steady, unflinching. "And I will leave as I arrived." A pause. "On my own terms." Silence followed. Different now. Not dismissive, not curious, respectful. Cody watched her, something unreadable in his expression, not pride, not possession, recognition, and perhaps something dangerously close to admiration. But even as the room began to breathe again, as conversation cautiously returned, as the moment settled into memory, there remained one thing unspoken, one truth neither of them had yet dared to give voice to. Because wanting someone, and choosing them, were not the same. And what came next would require more than courage in a ballroom. It would require something neither of them had ever fully risked before. The scandal did not fade. It transformed. By morning, London was no longer whispering about a refusal, but about a choice. Not his, hers. They spoke of the apothecary who had not been claimed, but had remained standing beside a duke as though she had always belonged there. Some admired it, many resented it, and a few quietly waited for it to collapse. Because things like this did not last, not in their world, not without consequence. Grace returned to her shop before dawn. As she always did, the streets were still, the air cool, familiar, safe, and yet nothing felt entirely the same. She moved through her morning tasks with steady hands, measured, ordered, but her thoughts were not as easily arranged, because for the first time in years, her life had shifted beyond her control, not taken, not forced, but shared, and that was far more frightening. She reached for her message book, paused, then closed it without opening. A small change, but a deliberate one. She would not wait for him. Not like that, not in a way that made her smaller. The bell above the door rang. Early. Too early for customers. Grace did not turn immediately. "You are ahead of schedule," she said, continuing her work. "I have learned," came his voice quietly, "that your mornings are where you are most honest." She turned then. Duke Cody Mackenzie stood just inside the doorway. No coat of arms, no audience, only him. For a moment, neither spoke, because this was not a ballroom, not a performance. This was real. "You should not be here," she said. "I know. And yet you are." Yes. A pause. The kind that held weight, not uncertainty, but truth waiting to be named. "I did not come to claim anything," he said. "Not your time, not your future." Grace watched him carefully. "I came," he continued, "because last night was not enough." Her breath slowed. Not enough what? Not enough truth. The words settled between them, simple, unadorned, and impossible to ignore. And impossible to ignore. "I told them to stop," he said. "I drew a line. But that was not the thing that mattered." His gaze did not leave hers. "You mattered." Silence. Not fragile. Not uncertain. But full. "And what does that mean?" she asked. He stepped forward once, not closing the distance entirely, leaving space, always leaving space. "It means," he said quietly, "that I am not offering you a place in my world." A flicker of something passed through her eyes. "Careful. Guarded. And it means I will not step into yours and expect it to change." Grace's chest tightened. Because that was the thing she had feared most. "And what are you offering?" she asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Something new." A pause. "Something we build without taking from either of us what makes us who we are." Grace held his gaze, long, searching, because she understood what he was saying. Not possession, not surrender, but something far more difficult. Choice. Equal. unforced. "I have spent years ensuring I need no one," she said quietly. "I know. And if I choose this, if I choose you," her voice steadied, "it will not be because I cannot stand alone. It will be because you no longer wish to." The truth of it struck deep, not as pressure, but as permission. Grace exhaled slowly. The walls she had built were still there, strong, deliberate. But they were no longer heavy, no longer closing in. They had changed, because she had changed. She stepped forward, just once, closing the distance he had left open. Not all of it, but enough. "I will not belong to you," she said. "Nor I to you," he replied. A faint, almost dangerous softness touched her expression. "Then we understand one another." "We do." A quiet settled between them. Different now. No longer guarded. No longer uncertain. Alive. Grace reached for the small jar of honey on the counter, the same one she had offered him days before, and placed it between them. Not as a symbol, not as a gesture meant to be remembered, just something shared, simple, real. "Stay," she said, not a command, not a plea, an invitation, and this time he did not hesitate. Outside, London continued as it always had. Carriages rolled, nobles whispered, society watched, waiting. But inside the small apothecary on a quiet street, a duke did not claim a woman, and a woman did not surrender her independence. Instead, two people chose something far more dangerous, something far more rare. They chose each other, without ownership, without fear, without losing themselves in the process. And in a world built on power and possession, that choice was the most unthinkable thing of all.